Greetings everyone, it is Zakes here and welcome back to the channel. Today we'll be talking about the tobacco bill and we'll be framing our conversation around the recent, launch of the report that was written by a senior associate here at the Free Market Foundation, Nicholas Woode-Smith. It is about the tobacco bill and how it is a case study of undemocratic lawmaking, right? And our conversation today will be about really the contents of that paper and in general having a discussion about really what the tobacco bill is, why it is problematic, the problems in the process and how it was passed, and really we end off with you telling us your thoughts, right? Now, what is the tobacco bill? Depending on which version of the bill you are reading, right? Whether you're at NEDLEC or in Parliament, you may know the tobacco bill as the Control for Tobacco Products and Electronic Delivery Systems. That version of the bill with that specific name was, introduced back in 2018. We have COVID that happens after a public participation process, and then the bill is shelved. And then the bill comes back again in 2022 under a different name, right? The Tobacco Products and Electronic Delivery Systems Control Bill. Now you might think this is something that is not major, but it is a great segue for us to get into the first problem of the bill. And what I would think that is the most fundamental problem, right? The procedure followed in the passing of this bill and why it is so problematic and on its face really unconstitutional, therefore rendering the bill null and void, right? Because it did not follow the Constitution. But you have these two different names for these bills. One might think that this is a formal, difference. As long as the substance of the bill is the same, then we should not be worried about, having two bills that the Department of Health says are the same being called different things. But then we look at the actual substance of the bill itself. Then we find things like a new section that did not exist in the 2018 version of the bill. And this section is a section that gives the Minister of Health sweeping powers to pass regulations regulating, concerning tobacco products and electronic delivery systems. So it is a piece of legislation that will introduce powers to the minister to pass regulations that will, over and above the actual statutory provisions that are located in the bill themselves, seek to regulate the tobacco industry even more. And this power of lawmaking effectively, because as we all know, right, that if you break a regulation, you could be liable to a fine or jail, meaning it has the force of law. The state can take away your liberty for breaking one, and as such, it is the power to pass those, the power to make those should be limited to the legislature. As we all know, the legislature in Cape Town makes the laws, Pretoria implements the laws, and Bloemfontein is the one that reviews the laws. Well, I guess since the Constitutional Court is in Braamfontein, we can say Braamfontein is the one that reviews the actual laws. Therefore, it becomes untenable, it becomes a violation of the rule of law in the sense that it is not a separation of powers when you have the executive, which is supposed to be implementing the law, giving itself powers to make the laws through the section that allows the Minister of Health to pass regulations without really any form of monitoring from anyone. And it gives the minister the right to also create a monitoring group that will pretty much be responsible for the passing of these, for the research, right, for the thinking around the passing of these new regulations, right? And these are two new sections that are included in the 2022 version of the bill that were not included in the 2018 version. This represents a material change, and as case law shows, there's a material change in the bill during the bill drafting process, then the public participation process has to start anew. This is not something that has happened with this bill. Instead, it was after 2022, it was pretty much rushed to Parliament without a new public participation process, even though it is, for all intents and purposes, a new bill. So that is procedural strike number one, right? Another procedural strike is that during parliamentary consideration, the public participation process did not follow, the law, right? I don't think the viewers would know this, but there is a case, Mogale versus the Speaker of the National Assembly, a case in 2023, which was about public participation. And without really getting into the details of the case, the legal principle that came out of that is that every public participation process that is facilitated by the state must give 7 days notice before it commences, right? So in all the provinces that a public participation process will be taking place, 7 days notice must be given to the community, to the public at large, so that it can prepare itself, so that it can avail itself to the venue where the process will be taking place. In none of the 9 provinces where this bill was discussed by the public, and we use discuss very loosely here because, you know, if you actually look at accounts of people who were there, who were having these public participation processes, it was pretty clear that the state was not listening to the views of the people. It had its own views, and anyone who did not meet those views was, you know, dismissed, right? The state wants to pass this bill, and anyone who is opposed to the passing of this bill is not entertained in a substantive level, something that was pretty apparent too in the actual oral presentations that the portfolio committee had, whereby you had, you know, presenters who were against the bill being passed, not being given enough time, being ridiculed, for lack of a better term, whilst those who were in support of the bill were given all the time, even invited to make further submissions and, like, you know, they were considered as partners, right, in the legislative making process by the state because, well, they reflected the state's own position that the bill should be passed. And as such, then, that is track number 2. Public participation process was not constitutional, it was not lawful, because it was supposed to give 7 days notice, and in none of the instances where it happened was 7 days notice given, right? So these are 2 glaring procedural elements. The latter one much more glaring in the sense that, you know, public participation is a crucial element in lawmaking, and it is something that can invalidate legislation. One should ask themselves, why is the state so insistent on having this bill passed when there are so many glaring problems with how it was passed, right? Not even getting into the aspect of the socio-economic impact assessment, not being substantive enough, missing simple things like cost-benefit analysis, and it being just heavily skewed towards the, you know, the justification of the bill itself being passed, right? So there are other procedural elements that are mentioned in the report, so I would advise that you do read it, but one must ask themselves, why is the state so insistent in passing this bill when it seems pretty clear that should any court of law look at its constitutionality, it will not deem it to have been constitutional just on the procedural aspects alone, right? One can only wonder, but if you actually consider the fact that our bill, when it was first introduced, was premised on the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control of the World Health Organization, which really seeks to, you know, make smoking all across the world as hard as it could be, right? You could say that the intentions are good, but the way they go about doing so is using state power to limit the freedom of choice of particular consumers, and I do not agree with that. But that is the basis upon which our bill is being passed. It is meant to have South Africa comply with this Framework Convention on Tobacco Control of the World Health Organization, and as such, it looks like the public participation process, the views of South Africans will not be considered in as long as they do not align with the already established view of the World Health Organization. And this is where the danger, right, of our sovereignty being usurped is presented, because you have these international organizations that actually, you know, want to influence domestic affairs all across the world, and there is nothing us as ordinary South Africans that seemingly we can do to get our governments to change, and yet our governments are supposed to be representing us and implementing our will, not the will of, you know, unvoted for bureaucrats at the World Health Organization, but our will as citizens, even if that will is something that the World Health Organization does not agree with. If it is something that we do agree with, then it is our right to follow through with it. But, you know, beyond the polemical element of it, the bill does have substantive problems, right? So the bill bans smoking in your private residential area. This is something that is the most absurd to me, and the fact that the state has not even reneged on that should show you that they are totally divorced from reality, right? So the bill will seek to ban smoking in public enclosed spaces, right? And also ban smoking, most importantly to me, as I said, most absurdly, in your private residence if you use that as a workplace too. And that, of course, is an undue inhibition on someone's liberty and their agency on their self-ownership, really their right to property, because it seeks to regulate what you do in your own private dwelling. And as such, it should be opposed on that basis too, beyond the actual unjustified procedural mishaps that the government will not be able to, account for. And then of course there are other bans on like the actual sellers of cigarettes, banning things of selling loose cigarettes, right? Single cigarettes are banned by this bill, cannot be able to get those. The implications of that economically all across the country, I don't think the state has really, appreciated. So really the substance of the bill itself is also problematic. It violates a bunch of rights that aren't being harmed by the exercise of smoking, by the exercise of buying cigarettes, by the exercise of selling loose straws, really. So one should wonder beyond, our World Health Organization overlords wanting the bill to be passed or wanting such legislation to be passed all across the world, what motivation is there for the South African context with the economy that we have to essentially have a bill that will make an economic activity much more harder to do? So those are the substantive and procedural issues surrounding really the bill. I want you to tell me exactly what you think, right? Are you in favor of the bill? Are you in favor of us regulating smoking more often? Are you in favor of the government just saying, you know what, no more loose straws, let us make it as hard as possible for, these people to smoke? Or are you more on my side, right? I am on the side of just live and let live. If something is not harming anyone, then allow people to pursue it as freely as possible, right? And the economic consequences of having, a legislation like this, right, that will harm, people who are reliant on the tobacco market and the tobacco trade to feed their families. We have not even spoken about the illicit tobacco trade, which has grown tremendously. And by making it harder for, businesses that pay tax in South Africa to sell their products, you are essentially making it easier for those that don't pay tax in the illicit market to sell theirs, right? And as COVID showed us, even if you do ban the selling of cigarettes, not a lot of people will quit. Therefore, having state sanction being the answer to all of these things is not the point. But I seem to be rehashing my point because that is my point. But yes, if you agree with my point, agree that, hey, maybe the state should stay out of my own bedroom and telling me how I should smoke or not smoke when I'm there. Please let me know what you think down below if you disagree with us and you are part of the many NGOs that have been taken under the wing of the states that are advocating for this thing. Also, please do tell us what you think. Tell us why you think it is appropriate for someone to not be able to smoke in their own home, why it is appropriate for people who aren't harming you to no longer be able to sell a particular product, talk about it, or any one of the restrictions that are included in the legislation itself. Please do tell us your thoughts. Give the video a like. Whether you liked it or did not like it, it does help us a lot just for you to continue seeing this mug of mine talk about liberty issues. So give the video a like, subscribe to the channel if you're unsubscribed. Please do share the video to anyone who may be interested. And as always, remember, stay free.